Hello, I'm Edward October. Over the years, I've narrated more ghost stories, horror shows, and creepypastas than I can count. And yet, the crimes discussed on our true crime podcast managed to scare the shit out of me. This program is not suitable for children or the faint of heart. If you are such a person, go ahead and switch off this podcast. Listen to something else. Are you still with us? Well, we've warned you.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, Cam, how are you?
Woo, that was loud and proud. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. We just had prom this weekend.
Oh, yeah.
So
that was good.
Oh,
Cute.
It's good times. Good
Baby's
times.
growing up.
I know.
Goes
It's
to a dance
fun.
in a dress and doesn't need you.
Get their hair all done up and nails and the whole whatnot. Yep. It's fantastic. I love it. Anyway, what do you have for us this week?
I have a case for you is what I have. Jen, you ready to go?
Yep. Let's hear it.
Okay, here we go. So Jen, there is a job out there for kids that doesn't really exist today, and that is the old paperboy or paper girl. Now, kids would wake up before the sun, hop on their shiny Schwinn bikes with the banana seat to deliver newspapers to the neighborhood.
Yep. My husband did that.
A lot of small towns, I think, had those. I think it's kind of went away for multiple reasons. Well, 13-year-old David Reed was the local paper boy for the Pottsville Republican, and he was always making sure to get his papers to his neighbors in Schuylkill Haven so that they could get the morning news with their coffee. David always wore his uniform, a T-shirt with the newspaper's name and logo on it, when he delivered so that people knew him, and they liked the kid. Now, at this age, you know, your bike is your transportation. It's your whip.
Right.
You know, it's your car. You take great pride in it, and it gets you to where you want to go and gets you to go hang out with your friends and get you around town. Now, one summer day, David left on his bicycle to go and meet up with some friends. Now, this was a common occurrence. However, when he failed to come home, worry set in, as this was not like David. It was also a concern because David had juvenile diabetes. And as you know, eating on time is crucial.
And your medicine. Yep. It is.
Now, David, along with his mother, two brothers and a sister, lived on the south side of Schuylkill Haven, which is in Pennsylvania. David's life had not been the easiest. His father had been killed in a car accident when David was just a year old. David had a brother who died from complications brought on by his diabetes. Still, David managed to keep his happy demeanor and was always ready to lend a hand if someone needed it. He enjoyed tinkering with bikes and hanging out with friends. You know, pretty much just like your average 13-year-old kid on the cusp of growing up and all that stuff that happens. On the evening of August 21st, 1985, around 4 p.m., David told his mom, Joan, he was going to go for a ride on his bike and meet up with some friends, but he'd be home in time for dinner. When David was not home at sundown and never called to say he was going to be late, his mother started to call around to his friends and family, thinking that maybe David went to visit someone and just lost track of time. As each call ended with saying they have not seen David, his mother began to get more and more concerned.
I can imagine. That'd be horrible. I mean, everybody knows. I mean, when the lights come on, you go home.
That's right. David's brother decides to form a small search party and go out and swing by all the places David liked to hang out. After coming up empty-handed in the search, David's mom called the police to report her son missing. Police hit the pavement and they begin searching for David, and they end up searching for him all night and have no success. The following morning, police officer Kurt Montz is put on the case and continues the effort to locate David. It was about 24 hours into the search when his sister Virginia makes a frightening discovery near the train tracks. David's bike was in the weeds, tossed on its side. Now, like I said earlier, and knowing kids, we know how much that bike meant to David. And at this point, everyone's kind of having a sinking feeling that this is not going to end well. David's family plasters the town of 6,000 people with flyers of David asking for help, thinking, of course, someone had to see something, know something, have heard him, seen him, anything.
Right. The town's not that big. You'd think that,
No.
you know?
Yeah, it's about the size
Somebody
that we grew
had to
up
have
in.
seen anybody. Exactly.
Days become months, and they are no closer to finding David. On December 15th, 1985, 4 months has since passed since David went missing, when a man was walking in the woods looking for his missing cat. The man makes a terrifying discovery, a skeleton. The man called police to tell them what he had discovered, and Officer Kurt Muntz responds to the call and arrives at his house. Now, I don't know about you, but the officer walks in, and he's pretty shocked because the man had picked up the human skull and brought it home and put it on his table. Now, I think most everybody knows not to touch any of that stuff.
You would think. I mean, there's enough TV shows that would tell you not to do that, correct?
Now, but this was then, but still.
Common sense would tell you to leave everything alone.
Don't disturb it. Leave it all as it is.
Unreal.
Anyway, as the officer is examining the skull, he kind of realizes that the skull, it's not like adult size. It had to belong to somebody much younger. So the resident said, hey, that's not all I found. I'll take you to the location where I found it. So as they get there, they do see some bones, and it's pretty evident that it's human. As the officer is looking around, he notices something white. And as he looks, he knows what it is. It's the T-shirt with the Pottsville Republican logo on it that David would be wearing, or was wearing that day, rather. It's clear that this is David Reed, but what isn't clear is how David met his demise. Since the bones had been out in the elements for so long, there was no real evidence to collect from the scene.
It's heartbreaking.
The remains are sent to the coroner with the hopes that they can discover how David died. Until then, officers are going to hit the streets and do what they do best, talk to people, and try to find out anything that they can find out. One such person that officer finds and talks to is a man by the name of Joe Geiger. Now, Joe lives near where David's bones were found. This is chilling. Joe tells officers he doesn't remember seeing anything unusual, but he did tell them that every once in a while, Joe would let his dogs out, and his dogs would come back to the house with bones.
Oh, no.
Joe thought they were animal bones, so he kept the bones and let his dogs play with them.
Oh.
He was more than happy to hand the bones over to police, and the police were hopeful that these missing bones would help the coroner put together more complete, skeleton, and to get a better idea of what had happened. I don't know about that. I don't know. Human bones, I think, are quite different than animal bones, but I could be wrong.
I wouldn't let my dogs just chew on any kind of bone that they found out in the wild.
Yeah.
That's just me, though. But whatever.
Yeah. So the report comes back, and by using dental remains, they are able to confirm that the bones are David Reed. Now, what they cannot figure out is how David was killed. Now, there is a few things, but the pathologist really can't determine anything of how he died, manner, or cause. So his death is noted as undetermined. Now, some had chimed in and said that they believed maybe he had some sort of diabetic incident and he fell and died. But police, they really aren't buying it. They really kind of believe that there's more to this than just a 13-year-old boy walking in the woods and falling over and dying.
I wouldn't think so either.
So at this time, criminal investigator supervisor Tom McDaniel got to work, and he wanted to find out exactly what happened to David. 2 days after diving in, a fresh tip comes in from a 23-year-old woman. She tells officers that she saw David on the night he disappeared. She said he was in a blue van, and he was in the passenger seat in the front. Now, police aren't quite sure what to make of her story because she was known to police already, and she had, how shall we say, more than a few demons, such as alcohol and drugs. She kind of had not a real trustworthy memory with the amount of alcohol and drugs she did. However, she does have a plate number. She was smart enough to write down a plate on that van in which she saw David. Police are thrilled, but that excitement dwindles when the number is put in the system, comes back as not real. Now, that could be, a number off, a letter off, maybe transposed numbers. They tried several, but nothing came back. So at this point, police decide that they need to track down every single blue van in town and see who belongs to the vans. However, they're still no closer to finding out David's cause of death. After a year passes, authorities decide to put David's case on the back burner. That would be heartbreaking.
That would be.
As a parent or a family member, that should always be on the front burner. But with no suspects, no cause or manner of death, and no new tips, they felt they had to do that. There wasn't much else to go on until somebody would come in with something.
And I'm sure manpower was needed elsewhere.
Yeah. David's mother had a really hard time dealing with the passing of her son, and she turned to drinking to help numb the pain. She would pass away from cirrhosis of the liver without ever getting closure on David. David's sister, however, Virginia, she's the one that actually found his bike. She was David's biggest ally. She would not let anyone forget about David, and she stayed on investigators to keep the case up to date. The case remained cold for many years until spring 2005, almost 20 years since he vanished. Officers came and went, and, new ones stepped in. They'd open the case, look at it with fresh eyes. Nothing new would develop. I'm sure the family was hopeful, but, it had been so long. Yeah, it's another new name to another new face to the same thing. Nothing happens. But, of course, you're going to hope and, wish that this all comes to closure for you. Corporal Rob Bettner with the Pennsylvania State Police comes on board and he takes the case. He knew the case would be hard, if not possible, to close, but he was up for the challenge. Now, in this 20 years, of course, there are tons of documents and evidence that he needs to go through. But, he really did have a gut feeling, and maybe this is what drove him. He really had a gut feeling that somebody killed David. It was not an accident. He just had that. And I'm sure as a police officer and looking at things, you kind of get that intuition that you would have. A thing in particular that stuck out was the location of where David's body was found. Now, the area, it's not populated. It's really woodsy, and it's also not a place where people hung out. So David either died right there, as in, he's walking and keeled over and died right there on the spot, or somebody placed his body there.
I'm going to go with the second option. Thank you.
I think I would as well. Another thing that stands out to the officer immediately is how one person refused to comply in answering a few questions back in the day when they went to talk to him. The 37-year-old man, who we'll call Darren, I'm sure he's still alive and don't want to cause any problems, was working near where David's body was found. And when police approached him, he would not talk to them. This was back in 1985. So Bettner dives in. He needs to find Darren. And it's not too hard to find him because guess what? He lives at the same address he did all those years ago. Now, Darren did not have a great reputation. In fact, he was one of the largest drug dealers in the area, and he was not afraid to use a bit of brute to get what he wanted. In fact, Darren spent his entire life in and out of prison. So authorities wonder if David saw something that he was not supposed to have seen and then ended up paying for it with his life.
Oh.
Once police get to Darren, he seems shocked and confused about why they would want to talk to him. He explains that the only reason he refused to talk to them all those years ago was because he was a drug dealer. That was it. He did not have anything to do with David Reed's death. Darren also explains that when David disappeared, he had a strong alibi. He happened to be in the pokey. He was in prison at that time.
That's good police work right there.
Right? Again, police are, they're feeling pretty defeated. And before they can leave, Darren offers a name to them, a name that they've not heard yet, Josh Fredrickson. Now, Josh just happened to own a blue van, too. Darren added that Josh had a record, which included a fondness for young boys.
Oh.
Now, this is, I don't know. I always say how the winds cross, the stars collide. I don't know. But before police can track down Josh for a few questions, guess who walks in the front door of the police station? That's right, Josh. It's March 25th, 2005. So police are wondering, did he know that he was quickly rising to the top of the suspect list in David's death?
Like psychic, yeah.
Nope. It's not it, Jen. He was simply there to report that he was moving because as a sex offender, You have to under Megan's Law. Now,
Right.
Megan's Law, if you remember, is the name for the federal law and also informal name for state laws in the United States, requiring law enforcement authorities to make information available to the public regarding registered sex offenders. I went down this rabbit hole. Of course I did. So these laws were created in response to the murder of Megan Kanka. Federal Megan's Law was enacted also in regards to Jacob Wetterling crimes against children. That case, the Sexually Violent Offender Registration Act of 1994. And basically, it just means that sex offenders have to register their address with law enforcement. And if they move, they have to go check in with them. And I think it's once a year they have to go, I'm still here, I'm still around, I'm not going anywhere. And so that's why he came in that office that day. Well, officers are like, hey, since you're here, let's talk to you. So Josh said he did make a mistake. He owned up to it back in the 80s in regards to his crimes against children. But he swears he does not know David or anywhere near where David was located. He knows nothing about nothing. In fact, he then adds, when he went missing, I was in the prison too. So his alibi, of course, checks out, and police's number one suspect just fell off the list. Now, maybe it's because years have passed, or maybe someone has a vendetta, but people start talking via gossip. And we all know, more often than not, there's a little something to gossip if you keep hearing it over and over, right? Keep hearing the same thing over and over, chances are there's a little morsel of truth to it all. One of the tales that police are hearing for the first time, but from different people, involves someone they know. Joe Geiger, the man who collected bones for his dog to play with.
Lovely.
You see, back in 1985, Joe was a 20-year-old weed dealer. Now, he was small time, but David was not a stranger to Joe, and they were known to kind of hang in the same circles, even with the age difference. Remember, David's only 13, Joe's 20.
Yeah, that's too much of an age difference to be hanging out.
So it's June 29th, 2005, when investigators call on the now 40-year-old Joe Geiger. Police ask him to recount what he can remember. Joe told him that he remembered his dogs bringing bones to the house, and he let them keep them until he found out that they were human. He even appeared on a news segment. I'll try to put this in the sources too, saying, well, just my dogs come up here with the bones and I just let them play with it. I didn't know it was human, whatever, But one of the bones, however, was a jawbone, which I don't...
that sounds more trophy than an actual...
Well, just, a deer jawbone is going to look quite different than a human jawbone.
Yeah, they all look quite different than... Yeah, and since there's really no apes in the area, I don't think that...
Thank you. So police want Joe to come in for an interview, which he did just 3 days later. Joe showed up, and he was nervous and seemed agitated. Joe was asked if he knew what happened to David Reed. Joe tells them that another person is responsible for David's death. Well, this might have been good information back in 1985, Joe, but okay. Joe tells officers back on that day that the 20-year-old Joe and his friend John Fry, age 14, saw David riding on his bicycle on the road. He stopped him and wanted to scare him for taking his stuff. And with stuff, I mean marijuana plants. Joe believed that David had stolen some marijuana plants. So he wanted to scare him a little bit. But that's it. That's all they did. Joe and John asked David to come with them to an abandoned train freight car. Joe had planned to scare young David for taking his weed. David agreed and dropped his bike in the weeds, which is where his sister found it. Once inside the freight car, the two older boys attack David while David begs them to leave him alone because he did not steal their pot plants. Joe then says John hit David, who fell back and hit his head, knocking him unconscious. Joe panics and runs from the train and doesn't return. So at this point, the police have to let Joe go. They need to find John Fry and get his side of the story. They find that he is still living in Haven, and they pay him a little visit. John opens the door and lets the officers in. After the officers explain why they are there, John is shocked, to say the least, that Joe would say he was the one responsible for David's death. John tells quite a different story. John admits that he was there that day with David, but it was Joe, not him, who hit David. After David became unconscious, Joe took his limp body and placed it in a shallow grave where it would be recovered 4 months later. Okay, this is good information, but the investigators still need more. They can't prove homicide, right? Who knows if he left him alive and succumbed to the elements? Who knows? So they need more. They need to ask a big favor of David's family, and that is, can they exhume his body to get a better idea of the cause of death? Now, that would be heartbreaking to have to relive all that, but the family, they really want an answer, so they're supportive. They're right there with them. Investigators want the best of the best, so they locate a pathologist by the name of Dr. Valsetti, along with his coworker, Dr. Mungy, and they would examine the body, well, in particular, David's skull. They're located out of Florida. Now, since 1985, obviously, science and technology has come a long way.
Mm-hmm. Thank goodness.
The doctor determined that David had sustained some sort of blunt force trauma to the back of the head,
right,
along with some very fine fractures under his right eye. That's what they needed. Now, the manner of death was changed to homicide, and the cause of death was blunt force trauma. Someone, now can be arrested and charged for the murder of David Reed. The question is, who?
Which one?
The fracture in the back of the head and the fracture in the front of the face would indicate that obviously he met with harm. That portion does correlate with both Joe and John's story. Now they just need to figure out which one it is. Well, it took some thinking, but then it came to them. When they had Joe in and they had John in and they had him sign their little witness statement, they made a little realization. Joe is left-handed. John is right-handed. David's face fracture was under his right eye, indicating that the person who hit him was most likely a left-handed person.
Mm-hmm. That's some detective work there.
That is Joe, right?
Go for them. Mm-hmm.
On August 21st, 2008, which also happened to be the 23rd anniversary of David's disappearance, and that was on purpose, mind you, Joe Geiger is arrested. Joe admits that he was the one that hit David, but he never meant to hit him that hard, much less kill him. Joe is charged with third-degree murder, manslaughter, tampering with physical evidence, and abuse of a corpse. Now, before David's biggest supporter could learn the news, his sister Virginia was found dead by her son from a drug overdose. Oh. And just like the mom, just the pressure, terrible. I watched some news interviews, and she really was like his cheerleader. The officers, the investigators, detectives, all that, they said that it really was like she was on him. And so when she passed, it was hard because she had been with them all those years, right? Like leading with them and going with them and giving information and all that stuff. And then with the biggest news of all, she wasn't there. Terrible.
That's so sad.
In February of 2009, Joe pleads guilty to involuntary manslaughter. Yes. Now, the reason he had to do that, basically, well, I guess the reason the judge allowed this is because little to no witnesses would come forward. I guess he kind of had a reputation back in the day, kind of mean, all that good stuff, because, he was just the 20-year-old bully. So nobody else would come forward. So that's what he pleads guilty to, involuntary manslaughter. However, part of his plea was to tell investigators the real story on what happened that day. Here we go. Joe tells them that he had learned that David had been stealing his marijuana plants, and he was angry. He was very angry. So Joe and John found David near the empty freight train. They had been looking for David. David liked to hang out there. A lot of boys. I mean, could you imagine little boys? Or me. I would love that. That'd be so fun. Joe confronted David about his missing weed plants and then punched David. David fell backward and hit his head on a piece of metal. Then David started crying. Joe said this scared him, so he and John took off for a while. Later, they would return, and they really thought David would be gone. They just kind of wanted to get away from this, is what he says.
Right.
But instead, David was still there. Joe said he thought he was dead, so he took his body and he hid it in that shallow grave. It's not really determined if he was dead.
If he was dead or not.
Or unconscious. Exactly. Now here's the, terrible part. Joe Geiger was only sentenced to 2 years in prison and was let out in 2011. John Fry did not face any charges. It took almost 25 years for justice to be served, but many feel that sentence was not enough.
Not justice, no.
David really didn't get his true justice. So I think when I'm looking back at this too, and you think that the police went and talked to this fella named Joe, whose dogs had found bones, and this was back in 1985, don't you think the police would say, hey, can we have a look at those bones? Or let me see, this is very close to, I don't know. Don't you think they would woulda, coulda, shoulda, but should have maybe looked at him a little bit? Because his house was right close to where David's remains were found. And his dogs, I mean, did he know that those were David's remains? I have so many questions.
No, I don't know. I would like to think that I would go back and think of them as a suspect, but I don't really know. I mean,
And maybe they didn't realize that he would often hang out with those younger kids. But, as a drug dealer, of course you're going to hang out with younger kids. Who's your client? Who's your customers?
Think that somebody in the police force probably grew up in the town and would say, hey, you know what? Joe was the weed dealer and blah, blah, blah. You would think people would remember. John, sorry.
No, it's Joe. Joe's the 20-year-old, but John's only 14. So John and David are close in age. So that would make sense that they would hang out.
Right. They didn't hang out behind closed doors. If they were caught or if they were seen, if like the train place was a main hangout for people, which it sounds like it kind of was, you would think that people might know, well, John was always hanging out down there and so was, or Joe, getting the names screwed up. You would think that somebody would put it together.
When that pathologist looked at his skull back in 1985, they couldn't determine it. But I think science has come a lot longer, and like the little tiny fractures, under the eye, and then putting it with that story, then it all kind of made sense. So maybe people thought he just had a diabetic, something happened and he just fell as he stood there.
Right. But it sounds like it was some kind of concussion type brain bleed.
So that's the story of David Reed. Bless his little heart.
Bless his heart. His poor family.
So have you been watching anything good lately?
Segue. That was a nice segue. Let's see. No, we're trying to catch up on the new season of Yellow Jackets. That just started. No, I did kind of start going back into my comfy phases of TV shows. Oh. Because we did like that whole True Blood thing. I did watch the very first episode of Columbo, which I was shocked to find that if the way my life would have panned out as I wanted it as a child, then my
father-in-law
would have been on there. Jack Cassidy, Sean Cassidy's dad.
I watched all the Columbo during quarantine, so I know. Jack Cassidy.
Jack Cassidy was in a lot of them, it seemed. I think he starred in 4 episodes.
He was a big TV guy then,
Yeah.
That's so funny, because Jennifer loved her some Sean Cassidy.
I did. I was going to marry him until my brother told me that Gene Simmons from Kiss killed him with a microphone, shoved it down his throat and killed him. He was wrecked for weeks.
And they're both alive today still.
They are.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I was so devastated. And my dad just laughed. Like he didn't
understand the pain his daughter was going through.
Even though
her boyfriend.
At a young, delicate age of 8, too. I was a widow at 8.
R.I.P. Sean.
R.I.P.
And what a way to go.
I know.
The old microphone down the mouth.
By Gene Simmons. I know. It was horrible.
That's good stuff.
Yeah. So there's that. But no, it was kind of a nice surprise when, the guy, I even forgot who the other lead character was, the one that was killed.
He's a character actor,
yeah. But he opened up the door and I'm like, oh my God, is that? I'm like, well, I'll be damned. That's Jack Cassidy.
Yeah.
Hi, Dad.
And that blonde hair. Woo!
And it's white hair. Yeah.
Well, like fake blonde.
Oh, and it made me laugh so bad because he's the villain and one of the people that he murdered was like out in his boat, which was just this little rowboat.
The John boat.
Yeah. Didn't even have a motor on it. Yeah. It was a rowboat. He's, at the scene of the crime. What happened? Oh, a woman must have been drinking or whatever and fell out of her boat and blah, blah, blah. And he just got off his boat, which I guess you never really see, but he's like in a captain's hat and a sweater with an ascot.
You're like,
yeah.
Gotta love the 60s and 70s, man.
That style, but it just made me laugh that, the captain's hat, like.
Like everybody wears that when they drive a boat. Oh, can't take the boat. I need my hat.
And my ascot.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
But no, it's quite fun to watch.
Yeah, it's just the acting, too. Is It's something, let me tell you.
It is. It's nothing like overacting. You can't act, you got to overact.
For
what
sure.
about you? I know you're watching stuff.
Did we talk about Beef yet? I watched Beef. I think we might have talked about that last week. I really liked it. It's a little over the top, but going in knowing that, I like Ali Wong. I think she's adorable. So that was cute. I thought it was cute. And let's see what else. I watch way too much TV, but I'm trying to scale it back.
After we put out saying tell us what to watch, we did have a couple of suggestions.
Ooh.
Which was Better Call Saul.
Yep.
That was one. Watched it, loved it. I love Bob Odenkirk. I think he's really fun. Another one was Swarm.
Oh, yeah. Swarm.
I haven't watched that one yet.
I don't know if I've seen that.
And then our good friend Drew is the one that suggested Swarm.
Okay. I don't know if I've seen that or not.
Also, our friend Drew is in a little Netflix show called How to Get Rich. So we
I just
need
started
to watch
watching
that
this weekend.
Yep. So
Well, which one's Drew?
Drew is, I don't want to give it away. I think he's in the very first episode. He has glasses.
Oh, they follow a couple of them.
Yeah.
Well, I'll be darned. I gotta go rewatch it.
But he's in the official trailer.
I was going to buy the book because the guy has some pretty solid advice, I thought.
Yeah. Well, there you go. But yeah, our
Drew,
friend Drew is in
out.
there, so everybody has to watch it so they can see Drew.
I did not know that. I'll be darned. Yeah, I'm on episode like 3 or 4, I think.
I think he's in the trailer. I haven't gotten a chance to watch it yet.
That's good. I did catch up with Ted Lasso. Did I say that yet? I love Jagan Sudeikis. I want to marry him.
I do too.
You love
I've always
him.
loved him. I know, he's great.
Yeah, it's really good. And everybody's like, I can't believe you're what? Because, the TV junkie. But a lot of times with shows, if I haven't gotten to it first and then somebody sees it and then they talk about it so much, then I'm let down because it's not as, you see what I'm saying?
Good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But this one, it's good. It's
Ted
good.
Lasso is really good. I've only watched the first season. I couldn't get into the second season, but that's on me. But my husband loves it. He's already
it's good.
Up to date on the new third season. Lately, I haven't been able to concentrate on TV shows, new characters. And Mrs. Maisel just started again, and I need to get on the ball and watch her too. It's their very last season. I love that show. It's one of my favorites.
Yep.
It's
and Alex
quite
Borstein has a special on Netflix.
Oh, does she? She's funny too.
Just came out.
Yeah, she's great in Mrs. Maisel.
Yeah, she is.
There's something about the show. I love the era. I love the writing. Tony Shalhoub's in there. I love him.
Yeah.
So
it's good.
Everybody in there is great. But that's it. That's all I've got.
That's
I know
really
my husband
all I
went to
got,
go
too.
see the new D&D movie, the Dungeons and Dragons movie, and he said it was absolutely fantastic. Friend of the show, Charity, she also went to see it this weekend, and she said it was absolutely hilarious. So 2 thumbs up for us.
Yeah, I have a couple of boys in my class, and they're very D&D type children, kids, adults.
Everybody loves D&D, Camille.
Camille does not know anything about it. So I asked a question. His name's Seven. I can say that. Seven snapped at me, and the whole class is like, oh, because it was like I was stupid. Because I think I said, is it animated or real people? And he snapped at me that I should have known that. And then the whole class is laughing. I'm like, well, excuse me, Seven. Because I don't know. I don't know. I still don't know.
It's real. I think Chris Pine is in it. I mean, there's some big Hugh Grant's in it. I believe. Yeah. I mean, it's not like some low budget type movie. It's the real deal.
I didn't know
type
that
thing.
though. I haven't even seen a trailer, so that's why.
Yeah.
If you're D&D diehard, you would make fun of somebody that doesn't know what's up.
That's true.
And that would be me.
That's true. But anyway, I don't have anything else. I mean,
I got nothing else either.
No, my life's been so hectic because school's on the way out. That's all I've been doing. My daughter's band just finished up for the year, and
your kid's going to get summer jobs. Is it summer job time yet?
They're both applying for jobs. My youngest one's only 14, and she's been applying all year, but nobody's really willing to hire a 14-year-old.
Well, because of how it is out there 14, too,
And now 15, she's going to be 15 in July. People aren't really hiring 15-year-olds.
Babysitting gig.
Yeah, but we don't know anybody that has little kids for her to babysit. That's the problem.
And me neither. Because we're old. All right, Jen. Well, that's all I got. I guess until next week then, huh?
Yeah, next week.
Same bat time, same bat channel. We'll be here. And until then, remember, lock your doors.
And keep passing those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya.
Today's episode was researched and written by me, Cam. For more information about this episode, as well as all the sources I used, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by hosts Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all Our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vertesi from We Talk of Dreams. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from October Pod VHS. Our True Crime Podcast is executive produced by Nico Vertesi and Dick Vane. Make sure to like and subscribe to Our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter at Our True Crime Pod. You can email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. If you really like the show, make sure to check out our Patreon at Our True Crime Podcast. Our True Crime Podcast is an OTC production.